Nobody is being cured by any of those psychiatric drugs. Matter of fact, a lot of them are toxic. So the side effects that they list, including death in some cases, they're toxic side effects. They're with long-term use, they will destroy your nervous system, and they don't tell that to the patients. And I started work at a place called Central State Hospital, which was one of the biggest state psychiatric institutions in the United States, if not the world. When I got there, there were 10,000 patients, down from about 23,000. So there was every kind of mental illness you would ever see in human form somewhere in that institution.
What city was that?
It was Milledgeville, Georgia.
Okay.
The place was the size of a city. It had 200 buildings, had staff dormitories. It had its own...
200 buildings?
Yes. 200 buildings. Not all psychiatric units, but different buildings to support the place. It was the size of a small town. They had their own hospital. They had their own dentist. They had their own food factory where they prepare food. They had their own undertaker. They had their own embalming place.
Undertaker?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's literally like a small town.
It was like a small town. It'd been around before the Civil War. So Sherman actually stationed his troops on the grounds of this hospital. Yeah. And that was back then well before they had psychiatric drugs. So they would chain these people to the walls, the violent psychiatric people.
And that was prior to what?
That was prior to antipsychotic drugs.
That were founded in what, 20th century?
Yeah. Yeah. There was around 1891 when these came into play. And it's interesting how they did because, pharmacology, you ask the pharmacist, big pharma, why are these drugs so expensive? And they'll say, oh, well, because we spend millions of dollars developing them. Mm-hmm. Antipsychotics were found by accident in Germany in a German dye lab, where the workers in that dye lab would get gorked out. They'd start with the falling asleep and stuff. So what happened was a French chemist came over there to try to find out what was going on. And they abstracted the active ingredient in this dye that was causing that, and it was phenothiazine. So it was a major tranquilizer. They first started using it for surgery, so they'd knock the guy out, so they was like gorked out when they were surgery. And then they found, hey, this might work good with psychiatric patients, psychiatric patients. But in Europe, the Freudians had taken over, and they wouldn't allow that into their system. They wouldn't allow chemical stuff to treat psychiatric patients.
Why?
Because they were all wrapped around psychoanalysts,
Mm-hmm.
Saying that's the only cure. Psychoanalysis is the only way to treat mental illness.
Talking. Okay.
But that never got anywhere fast either. Nobody was, it was very expensive. It was very time consuming, and they wanted something that would work quick. So they couldn't get it used in Europe. So they brought it over to the United States, to a mental hospital over here. And they started administering it to the patients. So all these schizophrenic and violent psychiatric patients, they just knocked them out. They were just walking around gorked out, sedated. Mm-hmm. And they went, this is wonderful. Yeah, they said, this is great. Hey, we don't have to deal with these people. We don't have to fight with them. We can just knock them out and let them roam around like zombies. All right. So at that time, there was a big battle between psychiatry and neurology. Psychiatry was losing badly because they weren't doing anything that was helping anybody. They didn't have these kind of drugs at that time. They didn't have any depressants at that time. And what they were doing just wasn't working. So when this phenothiazine came out about 1891, they started using it as an antihistamine and an anesthetic, and they would drug down the entire population of these mental hospitals. And the psychiatry saw that, and they just latched onto it with, for their lives. And that was their drug from now on. Even today, they don't like regular doctors prescribing it. They insist that they're the experts and that they have the sacred knowledge to administer these drugs. When all they're doing is this, I've watched them over and over again hundreds of times when they see a patient, especially at the mental hospital. So when I got out of graduate school and started off at Central State Hospital, this giant hospital I was telling you about, nothing in undergraduate psychology or the master's degree prepared me for what.
If you enjoyed this short clip, please be sure to watch the whole episode, which can be found right here. So click right here, right now, and watch the entire episode. And I promise you, you will not be disappointed.